Hey and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at something called a shadow catcher. Now, a shadow catcher is any object that will receive shadows from all our 3D objects. So usually we'll use them on the floor plane to catch shadows that should be on the floor, but they can also be against a wall to catch a shadow on a wall and also on, just different objects in the scene. So before we do that, let's just tidy up our outliner a little, because it's always good practice to keep everything in the outliner nice and tidy. So I want to select all these objects. So I'm going to Alt Shift select all of these objects that we placed in the scene, and then I'm going to press M to create a new, or to move them to a new collection. And I'm going to click on New Collection, and let's just call these objects. Like that, and now you will see all those objects will be inside of this objects container or collection. So we can do the same with our character. So I'm going to select the armature, but here we want to select everything below the armature as well, like all the different parts of our zombie. So I'm going to right click on armature and say select hierarchy, so that will select everything underneath it. Then press M to move to a new collection, and let's call this character. And then click OK, and that's going to move our character into that character collection. Now our outliner is nice and tidy. So let's go ahead and save our project. And now we can create our first shadow catcher. So if I look at our scene, I know that we will need a shadow catcher underneath all of these objects in the scene to catch the shadow on the ground. But I also know that, like for this object that's against the wall, we will need a shadow catcher against the wall as well to catch those shadows on the wall. The same with this wall behind the table here. Maybe we want to catch some shadows of that being cast against the wall as well. And maybe on this side as well, we can maybe create a shadow catcher against this wall so that we catch any shadows from these two barrels. Same with this wall, we would like to catch some shadows against this wall and the side wall as well. So for the ground shadow catcher, we can either create one big ground plane, and that will be the one shadow catcher for the floor, or we can create individual shadow catchers. So I think we can probably get away with one large shadow catcher in the scene for the floor. So I'm going to create a new plane. It's going to be created there in the center, and I'm going to scale this up super big so it's covering all our objects. If you move this plane around, make sure you move it only on the X and the Y axes and not on the Z axes, because it needs to be underneath all our objects. So I'm kind of just position it so it's covering all the objects. We can scale it even bigger. Now if you scrub through this, just make sure that it's covering all the objects where we need shadows. Alright, something like that. And I'm going to call this a shadow catcher. So I'm just going to move it out of that collection because I dropped it into the objects collection. So there's our plane, and I'm just going to double click and call this shadow catcher. You can really call it anything you want. Now, to change this into a shadow catcher, we need to change our render engine from Eevee to Cycles. So make sure you're on this render options, you're on the side, the little camera icon, and then where it says render engine, change this from Eevee to Cycles. And if you have a GPU, you can change your device to GPU compute. And now with this plane object selected, we can go to the object properties, this little orange square, and then we're going to scroll down all the way to visibility, expand that, and here you will see shadow catcher and some other options. So if we click shadow catcher, you will see nothing will happen in our scene. But if we go over to the render view here at the top, or the viewport shading, you will start to see something happening. So we don't see our footage anymore, but now we can start to see shadows underneath these objects, and that's exactly what we want. So let's go back to the normal viewport shading or the solid view, and now we can add some of the other shadow catchers. But I want to hide this plane for now because I can't really see the building and where I need to place the other shadow catchers. So let's just hide this shadow catcher for now by just pressing on this little eye in the outliner. So the second one I want to maybe create on this wall so that we can catch the shadows from this electrical box and also from this table with an anvil. So let's create a new plane. It's going to create it in the corner right there. And now we want to place this plane on this wall right here. So I'm going to move it forward. So G and Y. Move it forward until the pivot point of this plane is on the corner of this building. Now you can go into wireframe if you want to be exact. Just make sure that the pivot point, that little orange dot, is on the corner of that building basically. And the reason I'm doing that is if I rotate this plane, if I press RX to rotate on the X, you can see that it's obviously going to rotate around the pivot point. So then we know it's aligning with the wall. So simply press R and then X, and then we want to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm going to type in on my keyboard 90, press enter, and now we know that is exactly 90 degrees aligning with the wall. But obviously it's now inside the floor, so we need to move it up. So I'm going to press G and Z, move it up so it's aligning with the bottom of that wall, and now we can move it sideways, so GX, to align it with the wall like that. And now we can simply go into edit mode on this plane and just extend it so it's all the way to this side. So with this plane selected, press tab to go into edit mode, press 2 to select this edge or to go into edge select mode, then select this one edge, and we're just going to grab it and move it this way. So press G and X and then just move it all the way to this side of the building, to the wall. We can maybe move this top edge up as well. So GZ, just a little higher like that. And now we have that shadow catcher on that wall. So what we need to do with this plane selected, go to the object properties and then do the same thing. So just tick shadow catcher on this plane as well, like that. So now we've got these two shadow catchers. We've got the floor, which is set as a shadow catcher, and we've got this wall that's also set as a shadow catcher. So now obviously you can play this back, you won't see anything, but if we go into the render view, you will start to see that now we have these shadows you see there against this plane and also against the floor. Same with the table, you can start to see some shadows being casted onto this wall as well as the ground below that table. Obviously the lighting is not set up yet, so everything is very dark, but you kind of get the idea. So let's go back to solid view and let's create more shadow catchers. So first go ahead and save your project now. So what I want to do is I want to hide this big shadow catcher again because it's just not great to work with it like that. And what we can do now is we can either use this plane and extend it to be a shadow catcher on this wall as well, or we can create a new plane. But let me show you how we can actually manipulate this existing shadow catcher to catch shadows on this side as well. So first of all, let's just grab it out of our objects collection as it dropped it in there again. Let's just make sure we're on the scene collection. Alright, so we've got this plane which is the shadow catcher of this wall, and what I can do is I can go into edit mode, press tab, press 2 to select this edge, and now we can extrude it in the Y axis. So I'm simply going to press E to extrude and then press Y to just basically extrude in the Y axis. And we're going to go all the way to the corner right there. And then what we can do as well, we can extrude it this way as well to catch these shadows on this wall. So I'm going to press E again and then X to extrude on the X axis. And now I can see things are not lining up great in this area. So I'm going to select this edge and this edge and move them both a little bit forward. So GY, and just kind of move them forward just to match the edge of this building a bit better. And now I'm going to select this edge, move it a little further out, so GX, just to kind of match the edge of that building. And now we can extrude it that way as well, so we're catching the shadow on this side of the wall as well. So E to extrude, Y, and then maybe just up to there. We just want to catch that shadow from this barrel onto this wall. So now we've got all of this is a shadow catcher. It's going to catch all those shadows, and then we've got obviously this ground plane as well. Alright, so we can go out of edit mode by pressing tab. Just make sure that all the objects you create as shadow catchers are set as shadow catchers here at the bottom as well. Now later on we're going to disable some of these options under ray visibility, because currently these shadow catchers will still bounce light from the sun or from the HDRI that we will add later, and that will still bounce onto your objects. Now don't worry too much about this now, but once we set up the lighting I will show you, and then we will disable the glossy option here on the shadow catchers, because currently they are reflecting that light back onto the objects, and we don't really want that. We just want them to catch the shadows. It might sound a little bit confusing now, but you'll see once we do the lighting. So now if we go into render view quickly, we can just see that we are now getting shadows on the floor, and we're also getting shadows on those walls as well. So you can actually see it nicely here next to this barrel. You get that nice shadow against the wall. Same with these ones, also on the floor. And that's all the shadow catcher is really doing. It's just catching all those shadows that we will then later on composite onto our real footage. Alright, so once you've done that, let's just rename this one as well to shadow catcher. Maybe shadow catcher wall, so we know this one is the floor, so maybe just rename this one. It's always good practice just to name your objects correctly. And if we play through this, maybe let's just switch this to wireframe so we can see our walls and floor. And now if I play this back, you'll see that it's matching nicely. You can see the walls are not sliding around, staying in the correct positions. And yeah, that's looking great. I'm just selecting all the objects by pressing A, so you can kind of see them better in wireframe view. And this is sometimes just a good thing to do. Switch to wireframe so you can kind of see all the objects a little better. And yeah, everything is looking great. So go ahead and save your project, and I will see you in the next lesson.